So let me introduce myself. My name is Janita Vasquez. I am the program manager for development of our elementary materials at OpenSciEd. And joining me today was the lead author of our 5.1 unit, and that is Elaine Klein, and I will let her say hello.
Hi, coming in from Houston, Texas, and I'm at BSCS Science Learning. I'm really excited to share the unit with y'all today.
Great. And then also my colleague, Sarah Delaney. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, all.
Thank you so much. All right, so those are our colleagues. Sarah will be helping us today, letting folks in the room. She will also be helping us to answer questions from the chat or Padlet. So just want to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start with a little introduction to OpenSciEd Elementary and what that looks like in our program. We already have our middle school materials out in the world, and our high school materials were recently finished. And now we are excited to introduce our first units of elementary and several others that are coming soon as we continue field testing and still are writing our last units. We're going to experience part of the unit today with Elaine just to give you a really great taste of what that first anchor lesson looks like. Elaine's also going to help us walk through the storyline for this unit. So we get to talk just a little bit about every single one of the lessons in this unit so that you have an idea of what this looks like from beginning to end. Then we're going to talk about a couple of key features of this unit, some exciting things that Elaine wants to share with us about things we love from this unit. And then at the end, we will stop everything and answer some questions. Please know that we will also have the chat open for you to share questions there. And we will also be using Padlet today. If you are not familiar with Padlet, Padlet is a way of really collaborating and sharing ideas with each other. If you have difficulty reaching Padlet, Sarah is going to share a link for all of you. If you have a hard time with Padlet, please know you can just use the chat. We will be using the chat throughout and answering questions in both the Padlet and in the chat. And Sarah and Elaine are going to help me while I keep looking at slides because I can't see the chat at the moment. All right, so this is what the Padlet screen looks like. And if you want to add a question to any of those topics, please hit the plus sign and this little window will come up for you to write your question. Others can answer questions, other people that are in the presentation today in the webinar who have experience with our materials, or Sarah or Elaine or I will jump in there and try to answer as many questions as we can. All right, so a little bit about OpenSciEd Elementary. So OpenSciEd is a non-profit organization, and we work with fantastic curriculum developers and state science supervisors, teachers just like you, and philanthropic organizations that help us to develop free, high quality instructional materials and professional learning. Like I said before, we have already developed our middle school materials, have just finished high school, and are just in the midst of the elementary world, which we absolutely love. In this work, we have 9 partner states, and those folks have been fantastic in bringing us over 450 teachers and their 10,000 students to help us field test these materials. So teachers have tried these out in classrooms, students have tried these out, and then given us feedback to help us improve the process, improve the units and the materials. And now some quick facts about elementary school before we hand it over to Elaine to take us through the 5th grade unit. So first, our units are designed to be flexible. Each grade level has 4 units for the year. Today, we're going to talk about the very first unit in 5th grade. We also design these units to be modular. So while the central idea of these units stands on their own, we have designed these units so that we have a suggested guide of how to implement them, but we also know that you know your students best, your district has to make instructional decisions, and your state standards, all those things matter. So the units can move in order if that's what you choose to do. And then we also understand that elementary schools are complicated spaces. We do a lot of work. We have many subjects to teach in all sorts of different types of days. So our units are really flexible and reflect that difference in different schedules for school. So in the 5th grade course, it ends up being about 5,400 instructional minutes for the year, or 60 full lessons. Now, that means that each of our units, each of our 4 units, has 15 lessons. Each of those lessons, it's 90 minutes. But what we want you to know is that we do not expect you to teach that 90-minute lesson in one shot, in one lesson period. The lessons are designed to help students answer a specific question, but they are also designed so they can be taught across days or science periods or different times. So we are never expecting that those 90 minutes be taught all at the same time. So really, it's a realistic program to be able to work into your school calendar and into your timing for ELA, math, social studies, science, and all the other great things that you do throughout the school day. So we worked really hard to make sure that math and ELA are integrated into these units because, again, we're teaching elementary school. Our kids are doing all the things with us. And for our math integration, we really focused on using Math Talk, math modeling, and thinking about how math practices help kids make sense of data and how those math practices can help kids understand in the service of doing the science in the classroom. And for our ELA and literacy integration, we are really thinking about supporting our students in speaking and listening and communicating in different ways. We include several different kinds of texts in the materials, including read alouds, articles, opportunities to write. All of those things are included in the program. And of course, we are supporting kids, yes, in writing, but also in communicating in lots of different ways. So that might mean that they are making a drawing, they're having a conversation, they are using gestures, they may be using a home language to communicate in the classroom. So we were very intentional about our literacy and math integration in these units. And we also offer supports for differentiation. Really, our units, if you're familiar with our middle school and high school units, then you know that OpenSciEd is an open educational resource, which means that our units are adaptable. While we have amazing first-class writers and collaborators helping us to design these units, we also recognize that schools and districts know their kids better than we do. So if there need to be some adaptation and changes made that of course, keep the science learning moving, those main ideas, that we allow that in our programs and make it easy for you to do. We also offer within the materials call outs that provide lots of differentiation support. So you may see things like call outs like broadening access, thinking about English learners, thinking about community connections, those types of things to help you as a teacher to think about differentiation in the classroom. We also offer many discussion supports. Again, if you're familiar with our middle school and high school materials, you know that we think student discussion and discourse is a huge part of learning any subject, but especially science. So we do offer prompts for students to use, ideas for teachers to think about what to look and listen for, ideas for teachers to ask follow-up questions to ideas that kids bring up. We definitely make use of the scientist circle, and we provide amazing, fabulous resources to think about building classroom culture and how to engage all our students in science learning. And of course, we are currently working with kit providers and print material providers to be able to have those available for purchase coming soon. So those are not available yet. Those materials are not available yet, but they are on their way, so that along with the materials that you're able to download from our website, like teacher guides, handouts, slides, all those things, you can also have those hands-on materials available to your kiddos. And we are really proud that our units have been externally reviewed by folks from the National Science Teaching Association using the EQUIP rubric. And they have been awarded a high quality badge for NGSS 3D development. And really, we also were given the highest scores available for each of these 0.1 units. And we couldn't be more excited about that work and being able to share them with you. Okay, so before we move on, I know that was so much information. Very quickly, are there any quick questions in the chat, Sarah, or on Padlet that we need to address before we get started?
I think we're good to go. I'm working on the Padlet. We have some questions about kits, but I think we should go ahead and dive into the unit.
Awesome. Okay, Elaine, are you ready?
I'm ready. So excited.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, sorry, forgot this piece. Just want to let you know that on our website, you can find our scope and sequence for this program. And we are currently in 5.1 ecosystems and matter cycling for our students. And in the next few weeks, we'll go over the rest of those 0.1s.
All right, so this is the bundle of the NGSS performance expectations that this unit was designed to cover. So we'll leave this up for a second for you to take a look, but we are starting to build a progression with that first PE around the particulate nature of matter. We return to that performance expectation in the next unit. And we go from the tiny little particles all the way up through energy, through matter, through ecosystems. How does energy and matter move through organisms in systems? In line with those PEs, these are the focused science and engineering practices. We're doing a lot of modeling where kids are engaging in argument. We'll see some examples of that as we move through the unit. And then similarly, these are the cross-cutting concepts that are focused on in this unit that, again, really align well with the content. All right, so we're going to invite you. We're going to run through like a shortened version of the first lesson, the anchor lesson of the unit. And we're going to invite you to put on your fifth grader lenses to think like a fifth grader would, so that you can kind of experience this again through the lens of what a kid might experience. If you're able to, if you have just a little notepad or something to jot some ideas on, don't worry, this won't be painful. We won't get too silly with it, but we find it's really helpful to step into that fifth grade lens as we walk through pieces of the unit. All right, so with that, Welcome, fifth graders. I was on vacation last week and I was going for a walk in the woods and I saw some things that were pretty intriguing that I want to share with you all. So I'm going to show you guys some pictures of what I saw on my walk. We're going to see if you guys have seen this anywhere, but I want you just to jot down your noticings, your wonderings. What are the observations you're making as scientists, and what are the questions you have as we look at these pictures of what I saw in the woods together? So this was the first thing I noticed, right next to the trail I was walking on. So again, just jotting down your noticings and wonderings or holding them in your mind. We can look at the next picture. This was in a different part of the woods where I was walking. Let's go to the next one. This was pretty interesting. I'm definitely intrigued to see what you guys think about what I noticed here. Okay, and next slide. Now I asked some friends to get into this picture to really help us see just how big these things were that I was noticing in the woods. And a side view to help us get a sense of what it is we're looking at here. So here's a little recap of all of those pictures. So jotting down your final noticings and wonderings on those. And then I was talking to a friend about my walk in the woods, and she was like, I have a video that is similar, and I would love to share that with your fifth graders. And so she shared this video. So we're going to take a quick look. There's no sound here. So we're just going to use our eyes to, again, notice and wonder what we see here as we watch this short video. So it's a short video, but helps us think a little bit about where she lives in California. This was a redwood tree. So gives us a little something to work with there. So any final noticings and wonderings on that? And so let's share it as a class, you guys. We're going to put things in the chat, but don't press enter. So add a noticing, add a wondering, go ahead and type it in, but don't press enter until I tell you to. Try to give you just a few more seconds to type that in. And then go ahead, we'll do our classic chat waterfall. Go ahead and hit enter so we see everyone's noticing wonderings. Ooh, great. So thanks, Betsy. A tree growing, dead trees with plants, ooh, and some moss. Interesting. Some mushrooms. Nice question. How can a tree grow on another tree, right? We saw roots and trees coming out of other trees. Oh, Noelle's wondering what happened to the tree to make it fall down. That's a great question. Clover leaves, some more questions on mushrooms, exposed roots. You guys noticed a lot of the things I noticed in the woods. I knew fifth graders, you would have some really great observations. Aaron's wondering, why is there grass on the tree? That is a really good question. Thank you, fifth graders. Lots of stuff coming in here. Oh, Susan's wondering about insects, right? So we didn't see any animals, but Susan's thinking there might be some insects there. So that's something we might come back to. Thank you. Anita's wondering about how long ago the tree fell down. Yeah, so starting to think about time. How long has that tree been there? Ooh, and Amy's got another great question of, can dead things come back alive? Interesting. Lots of good noticings and wonderings that I hope we can continue to pursue as we do some investigations, fifth graders. So just a teacher hat or teacher lens moment here. So providing kids some language to help with these kinds of discussions as they share their noticings and wonderings. And so fifth graders, we're going to be talking a lot about this phenomenon, this thing in the world that I notice in the woods and you guys have been helping me observe. And so you guys noticed with what you shared that these fallen trees support other things to live and grow. And scientists and other people actually call them nurse logs. And so we have fifth graders think about like, why might we call them that? And what does the word nurse mean to you to help connect to the idea that these logs might be helping other living things. So as we continue learning more about nurse logs, we'll see if we want to revise and add to this definition over time. But for now, let's start to think about them as nurse logs. And so as we're thinking about nurse logs, you guys have some really good ideas and thoughts about like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And I feel like we could actually start to explain. We may not know, but we can start to explain what we think might be happening here. And so when scientists do this, they build models. They model to figure things out. It doesn't mean we have it all figured out, and to show other people what it is that we're thinking. So we can use words, we can use drawings. This example here comes from a student who modeled to explain their thinking about the question, what causes a shadow? So we're going to build some initial models. Again, this isn't about the right idea. This is about what do we think is happening with all these nurse logs that we saw. And so on your scratch paper, just take a quick minute to draw a quick model or jot down some ideas that you think fifth graders would include. And we've got a couple ways to think about this. You can think about what's happening on top underneath the log. You might want to start to zoom in and think about, you guys already were in your questions about what's happening inside the log. So we'll take just a minute to jot down some ideas. We're not going to give you nearly as much time as we would give fifth graders, but take about 20 more seconds. All right, hang on to your model ideas. And we're going to come together in a scientist circle, fifth graders. So we're actually going to circle up on the rug, teacher hat moment, either here or before this first lesson. This is the first unit of the year if you're teaching in order. We have not a whole lesson, but we have a lesson on building classroom agreements together. What are our norms for talking together about science ideas? They may align with the norms that elementary, teachers have throughout the rest of the day, but there's a nice structure here to help kids start to think like scientists. So when we come together in our scientist circle to talk about ideas, we've got some, agreements that we've made for how we're going to do that, how we're going to talk to each other. And so having kids share their models with each other before we share as the class to find some similarities, find some differences, right? So no matter what we're doing, we're having kids act like scientists, find some points of comparison. But then we're going to work as a class to develop a model all together to decide what do we agree upon, just our initial ideas, and where do we still have questions? We're going to answer the same question, how does a fallen tree become a nurse log? Again, we're fast forwarding a little bit of because of time. We don't have 90 minutes to spend with you all. But once again, giving kids some language here, some structure to help them in this conversation that can be a little challenging, it's vulnerable to put your ideas on the table. And so how do we give kids some structure to engage in those kinds of conversation as they come to consensus on ideas? And again, I'll just say, with that word consensus, we're not getting to the right. There's no right ideas here. This is what are the ideas we agree on? Where do we still have questions? So this is an example model based on real kids and real students' ideas, a real model from our pilot classrooms. And would love to hear in the chat, or you can use a reaction of like, did you have some of these ideas or did you have other ideas? I know folks were starting to share a little bit already. So things like mushrooms. Yeah, we've got some mushrooms going on in our example model here. Yeah. Adrienne is thinking like on the top of the log, there's more sun coming down. We've got sun here, maybe getting to those plants. Yeah. Getting to think about the different parts of the system. Thanks, Teresa. Yeah. Thinking about that term nurse log, thinking about when moms nurse their babies. So again, we've got things, we've got ideas here with question marks, right? We're like, we're not sure. We might need to do some more investigating, but we've got something to work with about our initial ideas to explain what is going on with nurse logs. How does a fallen tree become a nurse log? And then we had that other prompt, again, one of our CCCs, right, was scale. How are we starting to think inside what's going on inside the log? So just ideas that kids put out there. Just like you fifth graders, these students were thinking about what's going on inside. Are there insects? Are there animals inside? And so as we leave class today, because our day is almost over, fifth graders, I want you to think about other things happening in the world, other phenomena that remind you of what we saw happening with the nurse logs. You guys already started to even share some ideas, but you might talk to other people in your family and your community too. So take this home and bring it back tomorrow. We're going to share our ideas. Welcome back, class. So we are going to share those related phenomena that you got ideas about. And so would love to, again, keeping your fifth grader hat on, what do you think kids might think of? What might be some related phenomena after experiencing this and you might share? And feel free to just hit enter. You can share things in the chat. Thank you, Sharon. Mold on food, right? We saw stuff, maybe mushrooms growing on the log. Reminds you of mold on food. Oh, Kirsten was thinking in the same direction. Anita has heard of termites damaging houses. Yeah. Lots of mold going on. Thanks, Erin. Different types of animals. Who eats who? We probably have some animals going on inside the log. Oh, Teresa's thinking back to what she figured out in second grade about erosion and weathering. Yeah, things changing over time. Oh, thanks, Gail. You've seen moss in other places. Interesting. Yeah. So let's go to our next slide. And we've put out a lot of interesting things so far. So thinking back of our notice and wonderings, our model, the related phenomena you just came up with, I feel like we have a lot of questions that we need to ask. And so I'm going to invite fifth graders in our classroom, go ahead and write a question on a sticky note. And we're gonna build together a driving question board using the next slide. So you can think about the questions you might ask as a fifth grader. But then, oops, sorry, back one. We would build this driving question board together. And it's a really organic, again, teacher hat moment, organic, lovely process to have kids decide, oh, my question relates to your question. And just seeing this unfold in the classroom, again, it's just a really nice process to build our question. What are the questions that we have about this phenomenon we've been digging into? Okay. But again, for the sake of time, here's an example. Again, these are real kid questions that came up through the pilot and the field test. And in the course of having kids put up their sticky notes as they relate to each other, you kind of get these natural clusters of things. So kids had questions, just as you did, about time scale. How long does this take? How does the sunlight get into the log? Why are there holes in the nurse log? We had lots of questions about the plants and the trees, just like you did. How did the roots grow through? How did they grow on top? What are those pink things, right? Some people identify them as mushrooms. Others are like, what is that stuff? And again, just like you guys, questions about moss, questions about animals. So this gives us a nice roadmap for where to go next. And so from the DQB, having kids identify, how should we investigate some of these questions, right? We just laid out a lot of things like, how do you think we could test some of those ideas? So take a look at these. These were some really great range of ideas of how we could investigate those questions. Definitely a theme around Googling, everything from Googling to taking a field trip. So, but another big theme was, and we can see that here, could we use a microscope? Like we need to get up close and see what's happening. We need to get a piece of the tree and have a magnifying glass. And so from those ideas for investigation, we consider where to go next. And I will say teacher hat moment. There's guidance in the teacher guide of taking a look. Where are the big themes that kids have questions? And we notice across the field test, across the pilot, there was a huge theme, as we saw on those ideas for investigation, of we need to look closer. So I think next time we're gonna have to take a closer look at a nurse log. So, let's pack up for the day. That's what we're gonna do tomorrow, fifth graders. All right, so that was a whirlwind version of our anchor. I did just want to address, before we run through the storyline, I noticed a question in the chat. How do you explain to kids the difference between the questions from the Notice and Wonder chart and now driving questions? So, great question there. And I would say one answer is they could be the same questions, right? But there might be some of those wonderings that kids have at the beginning of the lesson. Again, we did this very truncated version. This is going to be 90 minutes. It might even be over the course of a couple of days. Some of those questions from the Notice and Wonder chart might be answered by the time they get to the DQB. They might not, right? There's a lot of big questions that were put out there. So there might be a little bit of filtering down, but now we're turning toward like, look back at your Notice and Wonder chart and all the things we have done since we did the Notice and Wondering to turn into what are the questions that we're still left wondering with that we want to figure out. Okay. All right, so getting, I don't know if did we want to drop the link to the storyline in the chat?
I can get that.
Okay, great. Just if you want to follow along, or I'm going to walk through it here, but knowing that all of our units have this storyline of it's not just a unit outline. It's like, now we put out all these questions. Where are we going next? How is this always guided by kids' questions as we go? Thanks, Sarah. So in lesson 2, as I said, where we left off, let's take a closer look. So we do that. We have, as part of our materials kit, nurse log in a box where kids really get to literally dig in with moss, pieces of wood, soil, to take a look. Some critters too. There's a little millipede kind of hiding there in the middle of that picture. They get to take a closer look, especially if they live in an area where the nurse logs are not in your local ecosystem. This is a nice way to get to engage and get that hands-on experience. We also have, I put up a slide here, we also have pictures of kind of more close-up look at the nurse logs. Those are these big pulled back images. And then we also have some videos that help zoom in. And we realized that in a lot of those pictures and videos that moss seems to be this important thing. We notice it happening first before the other things. So we think we need to understand more about moss and about plants. There may be some controversy. We found this through piloting and field tests. There may be some controversy about, is moss even a plant? And we leave that on the table of like, well, we need to go figure out some stuff about plants before we can answer that question. So we take this into lesson 3. Got a fun little side phenomenon here about giant pumpkins, because moss is so small. The plants growing on nurse logs can be so small, although they turn into big trees. So Let's take a look at giant pumpkins. There's this awesome video of time lapse of this giant pumpkin growing over a whole season. And then we also do a hands-on investigation with pumpkins or produce that might be available at the time to figure out that when plants grow, they gain weight or they get bigger. Weight or mass, those two terms are not distinguished at 5th grade. But we're not sure where that matter comes from. So we're kind of going down this path towards figuring out what plants need. What does it mean for plants to grow? And this is where it's taken us. So we have some ideas. We've grown plants before, right? We like talk about our experiences growing plants, and we know like there's soil, there's water, there's light, there's air. We start to identify the things that we might want to investigate. We do not have you grow plants in the classroom. You could if you want, but we have some data here of plants grown in different conditions. And so kids get to analyze that data to figure out that plants definitely need the water, air, and the light, but they actually find that they don't need the soil. So we kind of take soil off the table as something that plants need to grow. So we've narrowed the field a little bit, but we're still not sure which of these provide matter to the plant, which is giving that giant pumpkin, giving the moss the stuff it needs to grow bigger. So it's one of my favorite lessons because we weigh. We know matter has weight. So we weigh air, we weigh water, and we weigh light to figure out which of those has weight, has mass. And we find that water and air show up on the scale. When we shine a flashlight onto the scale, it doesn't change, right? So we figure out that water and air must be giving the plants matter. We also figure out, it's a lot happening in this lesson, we also figure out the little hands-on syringe compression investigation that air and water are made of particles. So there's a little more here. I'm not quite getting to all the details, but we figure that out here. So water and air particles are giving plants matter they need to grow. However, we always still have questions, right? What about light? What is light giving to the plant? So we take that into this next lesson. We observe a solar toy to see how it changes in the sunlight. And then we read an article to figure out some big ideas on plants transferring energy from the sun and how they use the matter from air and water to produce sugar. So we can see an example here of the modeling kids do here, as well as an example of one of the many types of texts we have in the unit. This is one of our newspaper articles that kids read to find out more. So this is like halfway through the unit almost. We have figured out some really big ideas about plants. We take that back to the nurse log. We update our model. And this is one of our assessment lessons. So there also is a near transfer task. So we're transferring, we're applying what we figured out about plants, but just to think about how plants grow in different environments. We're not taking it very far from our original phenomenon. However, of course, we still have questions. You guys already had questions about time scale and how long it takes the nurse log to grow, as well as animals. So we have some more pictures that motivate us to wonder in this next lesson, like this nurse log seems to have disappeared over time. So what happened to, we've talked about matter, getting bigger. Where does matter go? We figure out some things about nurse logs, about termites eating the nurse log rather. And that the matter doesn't leave the nurse log system as termites eat the wood. It moves to different parts. So another data analysis activity. There are no termites happening in your classrooms, to be clear. But we are wondering what else animals get from food besides that matter. And that takes us into lesson 9, energy. Kids probably have some ideas about energy. Being animals, we eat food. We do have isopods, also known as pill bugs or sow bugs in this lesson, live animals. There is a video option if that is not amenable or available to your context. But we have kids investigate them under a heat lamp to see how they use energy to move as well as to balance their temperature. And then they also read an article about birds who do balance their temperature in a different way, being endotherms, which is not a term we use in the unit. But we figure out that both of these are examples of consumers. Animals are consumers who eat other things for matter and energy. Very different than plants. That takes us into our next assessment lesson because we have figured out some really big ideas about animals that we can now take into our model that is growing very rich and complex as we're adding animals to the system. But lesson 11, guess what? We still have questions. We're wondering about those termites. We want to go back to them. How can they eat wood and get matter and energy? We use a really rich set of resources here to figure out that there are actually little tiny microbes, little tiny things in their gut that help break down the wood back into those sugars that the nurse log, when it was a living tree, made with sun, air, and water. And we're wondering then, how can are there other organisms that do this? And we want to go back now to those mushrooms, right? You can see we're still slowly starting to fill in all of the types of questions that we had on our driving question board. So we have mushrooms as a nice mushroom kit grow your own mushroom kit. That's part of the materials. Again, we also have pictures and video if that's not available to you. But we compare mushrooms to plants and animals to figure out that they're fungi, which live on other living and once living organisms. That takes us to lesson 13 because we're wondering, like, how does this all fit into the system, right? We're starting to put some of the pieces back together. So we figure out that fungi are decomposers since they break down those dead organisms and their waste and use them for matter and energy. Really important piece here. I know somebody referenced the FBI in the chat of fungi, bacteria, and insects of how without those decomposers, matter and energy would not flow through an ecosystem. So really big ideas here. Again, you can see our model is getting even more complex, but we're kind of closing the loop here now that we've got those decomposers. But wait, there's 2 more lessons. So what happens when that nice flow gets disrupted? So we use an example of the American bullfrog, which has been introduced from the eastern United States to nurse log ecosystems in the western part of the United States to figure out that when new species can kind of disrupt that balance. We also have kids play kind of one of the classic kind of food web, ball of yarn game to see what it looks like when a system is balanced. Introduce the frog. What happens when that matter and energy flow becomes unbalanced? And then our final lesson is a really nice example of another one of our texts written for the unit, which highlights scientists who study ecosystems all around the world. This is this is also an opportunity where we're highlighting scientists from diverse backgrounds here. And having kids now a little bit of a farther transfer task. We figured out a lot of things about ecosystems and food webs. What happens in a grasslands ecosystem, a different kind of system that has been disrupted in real life by wild hog species? And so having kids model, explain, write a scientific argument about what they have figured out. All right, that was our run through of the unit. I just wanted to highlight 2 more key features. So when Janita talked a little bit about the ELA integration, but just wanted to show an example of that, of a really rich texts and tasks that we have for kids to engage with. So shown on this slide is one of the bird articles from lesson 9, where it's a jigsaw. So kids are reading about different birds, or 3 different birds. But teachers loved these articles because they were written very parallel to each other. So even though I'm only reading about one bird and you're reading about a different bird, we've scaffolded it in a way where it's very easy for kids to find and share information. That evidence table shown in the middle picture really helps kids to find and then share information with each other. And then that last picture, I know it's a little hard to see, but just as an example, on the one of the transfer tasks where kids are using things like the evidence table to then write a claim based on evidence. Since that's a huge piece of this unit, we scaffold argumentation throughout the unit. And then the other piece we wanted to highlight here, every unit has these community connections. It felt especially relevant for this unit where this is a phenomenon that may not be happening in your backyard, but what are the things that are happening in your backyard that connect? So even as early as lesson 2, we're like, great, Let's go look for nurse log components in our community. Like, where do we see moss? Where do we see soil and dirt? Animals, log and wood, so that kids can make connections. Also, another example comes from lesson 7 of just what are things that help plants grow in our community. It might not be a nurse log, but there's going to be other things that are helping plants grow. So we found through the field test, which again took place all over the country, that nobody had a problem connecting to the phenomenon, even if it wasn't in their backyard. I think, yeah, I think with that, we'll take.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I hope you all learned. I know this unit and I still learned some new things today. So I hope this was really helpful to you in really understanding the flow of this unit and the coherence from beginning to end from the student's point of view. What is it that we're learning and how does this make sense to your kiddos? So we're going to take some questions additional. So if you have questions that you haven't put in Padlet or you haven't put in the chat, please do that now. We'll take a little bit of time to answer some of those questions. Before we do that, I just very quickly want to point you to this slide because we have many upcoming events for OpenSciEd. We are, like I said at the beginning, we are starting today with 5.1, but every Thursday from the next 5 Thursdays, we will be doing the rest of each one of the units in the 0.1 release. We also want to let you know that Sarah's been doing some back to school webinars, and those, while they lean towards our middle school and high school, there are many things in there that our elementary teachers can use. And we also have archived webinars on our website if you want to do a little bit more learning about what OpenSciEd is all about. There is already an intro webinar to elementary where the program's PI and I talk about all our programmatic pieces to OpenSciEd and a lot more detail. And that's that. And we, again, thank you for being here today. And now I'm going to stop sharing so we can hopefully look at some of those questions.